So I'm the founder of Sprouter.com, which is an online Q&A for startup founders. So the past several years, I've been jumping around from startup ecosystems around the world, everywhere from Sydney to Paris to London to Toronto, San Francisco, New York, you name it, I've spent copious amounts of time there. And so what I wanted to talk to you today was about doing your first startup. A lot of people have been sharing ideas about how to build a startup ecosystem, and I think a lot of it should be focused on what an entrepreneur actually needs. So I've had a failed startup, I've had a successful startup. I sold Sprouter just a couple months ago to a big media conglomerate. And I think I've learned just as much from my failures as I have from my successes. So in your first startup, in the beginning, most people's projections look like this, right? Revenue, traffic, everything's going to be off the charts, right? You're going to hit $1 billion within 6 months, right? I mean, I was the same. And sometimes you're lucky and the media is all over it, right? You launch, everyone's excited, you're out there, you're feeling the potential. Life's very exciting. And then all of a sudden it comes down. Then you realize that that projection that looked like a hockey stick isn't really that. It looks more like this. So you have that initial launch hype, and then you come down and realize, oh gosh darn it, people aren't paying attention anymore, people aren't coming to my site, people aren't buying as much as they were at the beginning when there was all that media and PR. And you have to figure out what to do. And these sort of up and down, I call these the humps of iteration. This is finding out what your product market fit is. The reality is most startups don't have product market fit right out the gate. The reality is you may think that you have the best product in the world, and then you get out to market and realize that maybe you weren't listening to your customers or your potential market that well. And so usually most startups take what I call the sloth ascent. It's a very slow, grinding way to success. And the faster you can get to that point, the faster you can be successful. But when you are in that mode, and when success is slow coming, it can be daunting. It can be really, really stressful. And when you're panic-stricken, it's the absolute worst time to be making decisions, right? You're not being overly strategic and creative when you're sitting around trying to figure out how you're going to make payroll. I've been there. So my first piece of advice is when you have limited resources, you need to focus. Too many entrepreneurs try and boil the ocean, right? They try and do everything and be everything for their customers. Focus on one thing and do it really, really, really well. Double down on what's working and cut out the fat. Dave McClure's not here, but Brad mentioned him earlier. He, has a great piece of advice about feature killing, right? Is sort of finding that minimum viable product. Hopefully, a lot of you here have read The Lean Startup. If you haven't, I encourage you to find it. It's by Eric Ries. It's a great, great book. It really gets you to focus on that product development cycle and focusing on just the minimum viable product. What are those minimum feature set that you can go to market and iterate off of? Really, really, really great book. Second of all, fall in love with the problem, not the solution. So I'm guilty of this. I fell in love with Sprouter. I loved it. I thought it was just the sexiest product alive. And the idea of changing it made me nauseous, right? That's my product. That's my baby. I built this, right? Instead of falling in love with the problem that I was solving and trying to figure out the best way to solve that, right? I was trying to solve entrepreneurs needing to find advice. And rather than focusing on that, I got caught up in the what if it did this and all these bells and whistles about what we could build. Don't let yourself fall prey to that, because it's very, very easy to get caught up in the benefits and the features of your product and forget about that core problem that you're trying to solve. So I learned this the hard way. Measuring is everything. And there's a weird mystical thing about measuring. If you measure something, you actually can invoke change in it. If you don't measure something, you're typically not paying attention to it. So create a dashboard. Set goals for your business. Every CEO should have a dashboard, and you should know these types of numbers that I'm about to go through off the top of your head at any point, especially if you're ever going to look for investment. Set goals, measure, test. When things aren't going well, try something different. And so the 6 pieces of a dashboard, which I have shamelessly stolen from a venture firm in Silicon Valley, creating recurring revenue. This is actually a great point I wanted to bring up too, and I'm not sure how many of you have subscription-based businesses, but anytime that you can build a business and a pricing model where you can have recurring revenue, right? Revenue coming in on a regular basis over time, do it. It's the exceptional business model. And you should always know your cash flow. Seems like a logical thing, but you wouldn't believe how many entrepreneurs I see that don't understand how much money is coming in and out. You need to know that as a founder. That's your responsibility. Your customer pipeline, who are you targeting? What's that funnel? You should be looking at your business as a funnel, and how are you filling that funnel, right? Whether it's media, whether it's outreach, whether it's hands-on BD, you need to be focused on creating new customers and knowing where they are in that pipeline. The reality is most sales cycles don't happen overnight. It takes time. You need to know how much time you have over that cash in the bank period. It's very, very important. It's something critical that a lot of people who are focused on products sometimes miss. Churn, how many of your customers are coming in and leaving? You need to know about that and figure out what the problem is. If you're getting customers in the door, think about how hard you work for each single customer. And if you lose them, what the hell's happening? You can't afford to do that, right? You need to find your customers and work on retention and retaining them and making sure that you understand what's happening with your current customers. Customer acquisition cost. This is a big thing that you're going to be asked in front of investors. First time I was asked what the cost of acquisition was for a customer, I stared very blankly at my investor. No idea. So it turns out that, doing sales and running a business is not free. And acquiring a customer, going out, even if it's just Facebook ads, or maybe you have somebody who's working the phones, that's a cost. And if it's costing you, let's say $100 a day to try and do outreach, and you're only onboarding one customer, and your customer's only giving you $50, holy shit, you have a really big problem, right? You need to know what that customer acquisition costs and try and focus on bringing that down and doing it in the cheapest way possible. And customer lifetime value is how much does each customer on average bring back for you, right? If your customers are only lasting for 6 months, you can start to calculate how much money they're driving for your business. Running a successful business means being successful at math. And if you're not very good at math, figure it out. So iteration, not ideation. This is a big one. I see a lot of entrepreneurs who try something, and when they hit that first sort of path of resistance, they back off. Right? They try something and it's not working, and then they start spinning over, well, maybe I'll do this. Well, Jesus, try and fix what you're working on, right? There's a difference between fixing your product to that problem that you've dedicated yourself to solving, than coming up with the next big thing and the next big idea. So this really comes back to focus as well. This is a big one. I don't think a lot of people pay attention to how much of an effect their ego is having on their startup. At any stage in your business, your ego is impacting how you engage with your employees, how you engage with your market, the decisions that you make. But most importantly, it tends to block people from finding product market fit. So what I mean by that is that whole sense that when your customer says, I don't get it, you get angry like, well, fuck, obviously you don't get it, you're not worth my time, right? How many times have people asked you to explain your product? If you tell somebody what you're doing and they say, oh, so can you give me an example? That should be warning bells. That should be you realizing, holy shit, I have not nailed my market. This is not good, right? You need to look at what you're creating and make sure that your ego isn't getting away to listening to feedback. The reality is customer development and developing your product is a very, very painful process. And if it doesn't hurt, you're doing it wrong. Because it sucks to hear criticism. It sucks to hear how your product sucks. But you need to hear it. So the faster you can get past your ego and start iterating on your product and really, really listening to what people are saying, the faster you'll find success. Startups fail from not having paying customers, not lacking features. Unfortunately, there's a really big trend, especially on the web where I exist, of free. Right? This idea that we should be able to extract value from services, participate in networks without paying anything. I think it's a terrible, terrible travesty of the startup industry, but we're also perpetuating it as founders because we want to give away things of value for free. I've done it. Sprouter's still free, by the way. You can still go and access people, get advice online for free because I was too afraid to charge. That nearly cost me my business. We almost went out of business because I was building a company without a revenue stream. Yeah, it sounds asinine, so don't make the same mistakes, right? If you're providing value, you charge for it. A customer is not a user. A user can use your things for free, but if they're not paying, they're not customers. So if you have 100,000 users that are using your site and you have no one paying you, you do not have a business. You have a very expensive hobby. So you are the first salesperson. I learned this one the hard way too. I am not a salesperson. And I used to hide behind that phrase a lot. I used to tell people, oh yeah, I'm not a salesperson. I'm not a salesperson. Bullshit. You're a founder. You're running a company. You are the first salesperson. You are the person that needs to sell that vision. You need to sell that vision internally for anyone to come on board and actually work for you and believe that this company is going to do something. You are a salesperson when you're selling to your investors, right? Even if you're just going to the bank to get a loan, you need to sell people that you have a great idea, that you can execute against it, and that you have all the confidence in the world to move forward. That's a salesperson. And most importantly, when you don't have any money, you need to be the one selling your product. So if you think that you're not a salesperson, I know a lot of entrepreneurs like say, oh, I'm a product person. I just like to build things. Yeah, that's cute. If you build something and no one uses it, what was the point? So one of the big things I learned when I was out there doing sales for the first time is that maybe is absolutely the worst word in the world. Maybe is that awkward position between yes and no that keeps you hanging on. I would go on like 7 sales calls to the same client, and every time they'd sort of dawdle. Push for no. Maybe is just a nice way of letting you down. So push for no. It's better that they say no now than waste your time for the next 6 months. You're poor, you're a startup founder, you don't have time to piss around with somebody who's telling you maybe. Get a yes, get a no, don't accept maybe. I'm telling you that's the best piece of advice you're going to get in the next 6 months. So it's not just who you know, but how you use them. This sounds a little awkward, and I don't know how to phrase it any better, but it is true. You need to use your network, right? I mean, look around. Everyone look around in this audience right now. This is your startup community. This is your network. When you're meeting people today, ask them, what can I do for you? Such a simple thing. But if you all walked around and talked to each other and said, so what's the biggest thing I could do to help you right now? Imagine. Right? We all need something. Maybe you need an intro to that client that works on the other side of town. Maybe you need help with your financials. Maybe you need intros into the States. Whatever it is, make an ask. Don't be afraid to ask people for help, and look around and figure out how the people you know can help you. And even as just making introductions to other people, you need to expand your network. That old saying, that old adage is true. It is who you know. I mean, a little bit it's about what you know, but it really is who you know. So take advantage of your network. Hiring for resourcefulness. So this is one of the biggest things that I hire for now. For a long time, I used to put a lot of weight on people who are well-educated, people who came with a high degree of pedigree. And I realized that the only thing that really matters when I'm hiring is resourcefulness. Because especially in a startup in those early days where you need people to wear a lot of hats, you need people who are able to sort of think on their feet, come up with creative solutions, and when they don't know how to do something, they figure it out. That's all you need, right? People who can have the capacity to think for themselves and who can actually react to situations and don't need you to handhold them. Because in the early days of a startup, you don't have time to be handholding and coaching everybody, right? There's already too many jobs being done by too few people. So make sure the people you're hiring you believe are incredibly resourceful and are going to work hard and be just as passionate as you are. One other note on hiring is that as much as we all like to think that we can hire people based on equity and just give them percentages in the company, the reality is most people can't do that. Most people need to pay their bills. They like to eat. They like to have houses. So keep that in mind and make sure that your projections are realistic. And when you are looking at hiring people, you're thinking about what's fair. I'm not saying that you need to go out and spend $250,000 on your first couple hires, but understand that people need to live. And if people are scrounging and trying to survive while they're working for you, they're not going to be as committed, and they're probably going to leave you. And you don't want to invest that kind of money into training people, right? You need to hustle. This may be seemingly straightforward, and it is, but it's worth mentioning. You don't get into startups because you're looking to work for yourself. I hear a lot of people say that to me, by the way. They're like, oh yeah, I just couldn't work for anybody. Oh, well, good reason. Startups are hard. Like they're so hard. It's sadistic. I mean, the chances are, realistically, most startups are going to fail. I know it's a horrible thing to say, and very uplifting. I'm sure you're all encouraged now. But it's true. Startups are a grind. They're a miserable, miserable grind. Sorry. You just need to hustle. And it means that every day you get up and you're pushing. It means that every day you're focused on whatever that hurdle is, but know that it's always going to be a grind and that there's always going to be another hurdle. There's always something. And the hurdle that you had today is not the hurdle you're going to have to jump over tomorrow. Just be prepared mentally that you need to hustle, and when you are in the thick of your startup and you wake up in the morning and you don't think you want to get out of bed, that's the point where you need to hustle even harder. So most startups fail because the founders give up. So my last piece of advice is pretty simple. Don't give up. Thank you.